Scott, I don't know how much time. We got a little late start tonight. I don't know how much time you have. Do you have a little bit more time?
Yeah, I can probably do one more segment.
Okay. Why don't we do listener questions then, if you're good with that? We've last episode I wanted to do a fixing the Bengals in 2018, and I wanted to try and squeeze one in tonight, but I just think time-wise it's not going to work. So cliffhanger for those of you who are tuning in. We'll continue that and end it pretty soon. If you have some listener questions, you can send those to us, as I said, on Twitter at BengalsOBI, in the YouTube chat, or via email at theobinsider@gmail.com. We got a few, Scott, kind of from all over the place. So one was an email that I received, and it's from Chad Ruffner. I don't know where to begin with this one. It's a great question, but and honestly, it sounds like a fan who was attempting to cling to anything positive at this point for the Bengals. Now, granted, the Bengals aren't the 0-16 Browns or anything like that. That they've won 13 games over the past 2 seasons, but when you've built up this expectation of getting to the postseason at least, I think fans now are they're restless to say the least. Chad wrote, he just kind of said, Anthony, give me reasons for optimism in 2018. There are, and I haven't emailed him back yet because I wanted to do this on the program, and I plan to, but there are many reasons for optimism, and there are many reasons for pessimism, unfortunately. Optimism, I think you could sit here and look at this roster and say that there's talent there. There's talent at a lot of positions, a lot of high picks at a lot of positions, a lot of former high picks at a lot of positions that they've grabbed in free agency or otherwise. Marvin Lewis is a polarizing topic, but, he's gotten them to a point that many other coaches haven't gotten them at under the Bengals' watch. They've got a top 12 pick this year, and they also will have obviously subsequent high picks in other rounds that they could use to immediately help their team. There are a lot of positives that you can look at this team and go, okay, you know what? They're not that far off. A lot of pessimistic opinions as well, Scott. So I guess try and talk Chad off the ledge a little bit with some of your reasons for optimism in 2018, and if the Bengals can make a quick turnaround in 2018.
Well, I think you nailed one of the key reasons for optimism is the roster. I still think they have a very good roster. You look at the skill positions, Joe Mixon, I think, looked very good. Giovanni Bernard showed he had life last year after kind of being underutilized the last few years. They still have A.J. Green, who's, made 7 Pro Bowls in 7 years. Boyd and Ross have upside that possibly one of them turns into a solid number 2. They may have Eifert back if he's healthy. You never know. Defensively, Atkins is obviously a stud. Lawson and William Jackson showed they were both, great players. Lawson was a great edge rusher. William Jackson was one of the top, cover corners last year. I think PFF, who we've mentioned several times this week, so might as well go with that trend. PFF, I think, rated him number 5 overall, rated him first or second in some categories like opposing yards per attempt, opposing QB rating, et cetera, et cetera. You have other than the offensive line, I think that's the big question. You can hope that the guy from Dallas, is going to fix some of that. I think one of the keys, you mentioned some of the offensive linemen earlier that Dallas drafted, guys like Frederick and Martin and Tyron Smith. And the key is not only did they invest high picks, but they were great picks. They took the right people. And that's the thing that I'm hoping he brings to this team is if they draft that lineman at 12 or in the second round, or when they make decisions of the guys they have on their roster. And also, a guy like Doug Free wasn't a high pick, but they realized this is a good guy. Let's grab him. Let's put him at right tackle. So if this guy can come in and if he can do something like that and say, hey, Alex Redmond or Westerman or whoever it is, this guy needs to play this position. This guy, we need to bring this guy in, that guy in the draft. We need to, if he can identify that and somehow do anything to fix that offensive line, I think they have enough other pieces around that. And I was foolishly optimistic last year because I figured outside of the offensive line, they have a good team. I unfortunately this time last year I wasn't expecting the offensive line to sink them as bad as it did. So if that can be fixed, so that's kind of the one exception is if he can come in and have some of those player personnel decisions on the offensive line that make the same kind of impact they did in Dallas. I think they have enough of the other weapons around the offense and enough decent players on defense that, you know, with Terrell Austin come in, hopefully they can be more than just a collection of good players, but a good defensive unit that takes that step from being a solid one to a very good one. So, yeah, the pieces are there. You know, I understand the reasons for pessimism, and the biggest one is Marvin Lewis. But I think the team showed in 2015 they could overcome that. They could overcome Marvin Lewis with a great collection of players, a great collection of, you know, assistant coaches who are doing well, and just so much talent and so much going for them that if they can get back to that, which I think they could, if they can fix the offensive line, that chance that, you know, they have the potential to be able to overcome anything Marvin Lewis may do.
I love that you brought up Doug Free, because if you look at Doug Free's career and what the Cowboys did, he was a serviceable, decent left tackle in the NFL for a handful of years. In 2011, the Cowboys drafted Tyron Smith, and in 2011, Doug Free played left tackle and Tyron Smith played right tackle. Well, what they saw was that Tyron Smith was going to be a much better left tackle than Doug Free was, but Doug Free was still a solid tackle. And then they swapped in 2012. They swapped positions, and all of a sudden, Doug Free becomes a very solid right tackle for the Cowboys, while Tyron Smith becomes a Pro Bowl left tackle for them. So they had a very good line, and they were not afraid to make a change. It's something that was beneficial for their team, and you know, maybe Frank Pollock had something to do with that. I don't know, but obviously that worked out well for the Cowboys in general. And, you know, Doug Free became a pretty dang good right tackle, while Tyron Smith was great on the left side. You know, I guess this just comes down again to who do the Bengals want to be? And that the lack of identity, and that was one of our points of fixing the Bengals in 2018. The lack of an identity is something that has plagued this team, and I don't know if bringing Marvin Lewis back and maybe having Terrell Austin and Frank Pollock and a couple of other coaching changes is going to fix that. But if the Bengals find out who they want to be and draft the correct players for that image or that identity, then I think there are very good reasons to be positive. On the pessimistic side, unfortunately, I mentioned it before, because of the shortcomings in the front office and the way this team operates, the margin of error for the Bengals in terms of, because they don't do much in free agency, the margin of error in their draft picks, which they covet so highly, is very small. They can't whiff on a lot of guys, whereas other teams might, because they bring in other free agents and you know, quarterbacks, coaching, that whole thing. And so unfortunately, the Bengals are playing with, I've said this before on this show, they're playing with a little bit of a handicap every year because of ownership and how this team is run. And they need to be able to get past that. I don't know that 2018 and Marvin Lewis coming back, supposedly wrestling maybe some power away from Mike Brown is going to do that. We'll see. There are reasons to be optimistic. There are reasons to be pessimistic. And that's about as best as I can give Chad at this point. Thank you so much for the email. Scott, we got a tweet at us it was on Monday by Charlie S at C Shrink, and he just says, "What are the expectations for Joe Mixon this coming season? Is he the guy? Should he be used like Jeremy Hill was used with Giovanni Bernard, where you mix in a healthy dose of both?" Obviously there's fantasy implications, and you're a resident fantasy football expert here, but Joe Mixon, unfortunately, kind of ended. He was kind of nicked up at the end of the year, but Giovanni Bernard stepped up quite a bit, and I don't. It was surprising, but I don't know that we should be surprised because we've seen him do it. We've seen him play well. So it seems by all indications that Jeremy Hill's gone. Even by his own Twitter account, it seems like he's gone. So, what should we expect from Jeremy Hill this year? And might the Bengals take a running back in the mid rounds of this draft, because Cedric Pierman is now a free agent as well. He's had some injury issues. Great special teams player, doesn't give you much on offense. And now you've kind of got what seems to be a two-headed Jabberwocky. That's the first time I've ever used that term on a show. Jabberwocky, a two-headed monster with Giovanni Bernard and Joe Mixon. Should Mixon get the lion's share of the touches, or did Bernard prove his worth a bit more at the end of the year and say, you know what, let's split this up?
I still think based on what we saw from Mixon, his numbers weren't there, but when he had blocking, any sort of blocking, and wasn't getting tackled 3 yards beyond the line of scrimmage, he shows he is a very good runner. He's a natural runner, has good, all the things you want in a great running back, he has. And I think he deserves to get a lot of touches. That being said, I think you have to give some touches to Giovanni Bernard. You have to get him involved. And he showed last year he is still a very, very capable running back. I know there's a lot of hype for him. We were very excited as fans for him, back in 2013 and 2014 when he was subbing in with Ben Jarvis Green Ellis, who was kind of a plotter in the Cedric Benson kind of mold. And then Bernard comes out like, wow, this guy can catch the ball. He's fairly dynamic. He can make people miss. And then he kind of got lost in the shuffle when Jeremy Hill came out and he had his big year. And then we kind of saw him as more of like a third down guy. And then last year, or back in 2016, Bernard had like 300 yards and, low average and nothing too exciting. Well, last year he showed that despite that line just being atrocious, he's still a pretty good running back. So I think it's a good problem to have. I think they have two very good running backs. Of the two, I'd probably say Mixon is probably the more talented overall. Just the stuff he can do. I think Bernard's good too, but I think they have to play both, and I think they will. I'm not quite sure how they'll play them. I don't know if they'll do Bernard's the third down guy and Mixon is the Jeremy Hill role, because Joe Mixon showed he can catch the ball too. He's a very good receiver. He can block. He's a guy who could be a three down back if they wanted to go that route. So I'd love to see them do something like that and not do the predictable. When they had Hill and Bernard, it was very predictable. We're putting Bernard in there, and in these formations, it's going to be a draw play on 3rd and long to him, or it's going to be a screen pass. We put Hill in on 1st, 2nd down. We're running him right up behind Russell Bodine and just kind of hoping that miraculously there's a hole that opens up. I'd love to see them just mix these two guys and say, we don't care what down it is. We're putting Bernard out there. We're putting Mixon out there. And we're not going to tip our hand because they can both do everything well. They can both run well. They can both make people miss. They can both catch the ball well. They can both pass protect. So I'd love to see them just, ride the hot hand as much as, as a fantasy guy, I hate that. I'd like to have teams say, this is our guy and run with it. But, as a Bengals fan, I'd love to see them say, these guys are both good. Let's put them out there. Let's give them both the same chances on same situations, 1st and 10, 3rd and 5, 3rd and 1. Let's get these guys both out there, get them both involved. So I guess it doesn't answer the question. The question, I'd say I would expect Mixon to do more than last year, assuming the offensive line can't get any worse. I have to assume they hit rock bottom. And, unless we repeat the 1990s offensive line, we're putting guys like, Rod Jones out there. And so assuming the offensive line shows any sign of improvement, I think you would see a big step forward from Mixon as far as his yards per carry and what he's going to do, because he can make people miss. Instead of going from -5 yards to 0, he can go from 0 to 5 or 0 to 10, whatever that is. So I would expect bigger things from him. I wouldn't expect a huge season. You mentioned fantasy 1st round pick kind of thing, only because I think they both deserve to be involved in the offense. And so I would expect Bernard to be fully involved as well. So you're probably looking at two guys who are probably going to get somewhere between 500 to 900 yards rushing, maybe 300 to 600 yards receiving, just taking a stab in the dark.
Yeah. Again, I think this kind of comes back to who do you want to be? What do you want to do? And obviously those two runners have two different styles and what they bring to the offense. I saw a comment from a couple of folks in the YouTube chat. Michael Myers, cue the Halloween theme. Run a two-back system with both in the backfield and make defenses guess if we run or pass. I love that. I love that idea in theory, and that's what the Bengals did in '88 when they had James Brooks and Nicky Woods. They did a lot of that. I just don't know if I don't know if that'll work at the current moment, but I would like to see more of that. Christopher Higdon says Mixon, Bernard, Brian Hill, Jarvian Williams were good at running back in terms of potentially adding another back. I'm going to say this. I definitely think you're going to see more touches from Joe Mixon. He had 178 carries and 30 receptions last year. First couple of weeks, eight carries, 9 carries, nothing. And then, weeks 3 through 5, 18, 17, 15, then only 7 carries against Pittsburgh, 11 carries against Indianapolis. So, and then, weeks 10 and 11, 20 carries against Denver and 23 carries against Cleveland. Both of those were wins, not surprising there. Joe Mixon last year had an 88.2% catch rate, and I think that's something to note in terms of, a lot of people think, well, Joe Mixon is a guy that is more of a running back, not necessarily great in the pass. I mean, they know he could do it, but that's something that goes overlooked. Giovanni Bernard, surprisingly, has a career around 75% catch rate, which is, kind of lower than I thought for a guy that's a receiving back. But I will say this, Giovanni Bernard is a guy that is a 3-down type of back. Now, is he a guy that you can rely on giving the ball 35 times, 35 rushes? No, not necessarily, but he's a guy who is really, really unheralded in pass protection. And if the Bengals don't do much to fix their offensive line, or there's similar issues pop up again in 2018, I think he's a guy that needs to be on the field quite a bit for that purpose. I think he needs to be a guy that is out there pass blocking, can peel off and get a catch. I would like to see, and there are great highlights of Giovanni Bernard, taking catches and going a long way with those catches. I will say that when I watch, there are times when I watch the Bengals games and I see right after the snap, I see it developing. When he's in the game, it's a very predictable screen pass play or a dump off or something like that, and I go, Gio, I just call it out because I see it. And if I can see it, I would think that opposing football coaches can see it. I would see, it seems as if there is a big play opportunity or a loss or an incompletion that tends to happen from Gio Bernard because of the predictability of the play calling. So I'd like to see them disguise that more, whether it's from Michael Myers' suggestion of using the 2-back system a bit more and putting them in at the same time. Sure, that could work, but we'll see. Obviously, Gio, though, when given the chance, does shine. Unfortunately, he just kind of keeps getting pushed back in the pecking order. And I'd like to see them utilize both guys. And if the Bengals don't get after another wide receiver this year in the draft or free agency, maybe they just continue to split them out wide more. And if you remember, that's what Hugh Jackson did quite a bit. Gio Bernard was split in the slot as a receiver in 2015, 2014 when he was healthy, and it was effective. You have Hewitt, potentially a running back in the backfield, and then you split Gio out in the slot. I think that's a creative way to use both of them personally. But expectations for Joe Mixon, I think an increase of carries, obviously an increase of catches. I do expect probably a 1,000-yard rushing season, maybe a, decent, probably overall a 1,400, 1,500-yard from scrimmage type of effort. He had close to 1,000 this last year. So, I think, but I think obviously the big key is efficiency in terms of those touches. Is he going to get 4+ yards per carry? Is he going to get, good pop these big catches off? I do think he's probably a mid-round fantasy pick if that's what we're talking about. But, I do think there's going to be a spike in his overall productivity. It's just a matter of efficiency. It's a matter of yards per carry and all of that good stuff. We're going to get out of here with one more question. Scott, I appreciate it. I know it's a little late on your end. We had, and I really wanted to get to this one because it's from Carlos Andre, who sent us a message on our YouTube channel. And he is from Brazil. Hey guys, Bengals fan from Brazil here. So we are international, my friend. What do you think about the quote halftime adjustments unquote? Do you think that Marvin will change his mind this season and start to do that? Well, this has been a season, and this is, when Marvin was re-signed, even though that's not a change, there was talk of, there are changes, maybe free agency, maybe other things. Mike Brown he kind of played things close to the vest in terms of that in a recent interview. And it almost sounds like the Bengals are going to focus internally once again for free agency. We'll see. Halftime adjust. Unfortunately, Marvin Lewis is, while he's kind of, to me, and I want to get your thoughts on this, Scott, but to me, he's kind of a macro picture guy. He knows how to build a roster. He does get, he does evaluate talent pretty well for the most part. I think overall, we can say that. Sure, there are big misses, but overall, I think there's, certain big hits that he's had. And free agency, I would say, has been not his strength. There's been all kinds of guys, mostly on the defensive side of the ball at linebacker and other areas that have been really surprising. Antoine Odom comes to mind. The former linebacker of, I can't think of his name at the moment, former linebacker of the Buccaneers and the Broncos, who has since been subsequently arrested and jailed for some pretty horrific crimes, is another. Nate Webster, that's the guy. Other free agency gets, he has not been as strong on. But when Marvin Lewis has been at his best, it's been when he's had a number of different high-profile coaches as his coordinators, as his assistants, and there were, even in the early years of the 5-year run to the postseason, there was a lot of issues with clock management and halftime adjustments and all of that. Got a little better at some points, and then really the last 2 years, especially the halftime adjustments, that has been absurdly awful. So, to me, I don't think, and not to use a ridiculous pun here, I don't think a tiger can change his stripes in terms of halftime adjustments. The guy's been the coach here for 15, 16 years, and he hasn't been able to grasp that concept. Nor, when he's been asked about it, he kind of just brushes that off as I don't know. So I don't think it's going to get better, but I could be wrong, and maybe overall talent of the roster and just a different focus that he might be bringing could change that. But I don't think it's going to get better in terms of the halftime adjustments. What about you, Scott?
I would say it's very, to your point, and we kind of mentioned this earlier, I think Marvin is more of a old school guy. I think for whatever reason, that's just not something in his DNA. And after, 15 years, if it's not there, I think you can safely say it's just, for whatever reason, it's not there. You don't feel it's necessary, can't grasp it, whatever it is. Now that being said, you could hope that, hey, the assistants could do it, but then you look at, the offensive coordinator, Kevin Coyle this past year. When he came in, they were great in the first. Well, they were better in the first half, and in the second half of so many games, the scoring just totally vanished. Outside of a couple games late in the year, like the Baltimore game or whatever, or the Browns, because the Browns were 0-16. Outside of those games, they basically disappeared in the second half. So it didn't look like that was happening on the offensive side of the ball. That remains to be seen if that'll happen on the defensive side of the ball with the new defensive coordinator. And you have to hope, deep down that they're at least doing something. They're not saying, you hope that most of these coaches have, obviously a game plan. We see this is what the opponent does. This is what we're going to do. And we're not only just going to do that, we're going to try to figure out how are they going to counter this and what are we going to do to counter that. So when the game comes, we have all that figured out. It doesn't seem like for whatever reason they do it, or if they do it, they're not doing it well. I would love to be optimistic and say this is the year that happens, but yeah, you can only see it happen, not happen so many times before you just realize that's just not something that seems to be one of their strengths. They seem to do a fairly good job of initial game planning. They've had a lot of solid, first halves in Marvin's career. Second half's a different story. And just for whatever reason, that just doesn't seem to be something that they grasp. I'd love to give a different answer to our domestic and foreign fans. I just, I can't really say anything other than just.
Unfortunately, we talked about reasons for pessimism and optimism. I just don't know if this is a reason for optimism. And I hate to give that news down to Brazil, but that's kind of how I feel. Michael Myers in the YouTube chat said, we need to play aggressive like Philly did in the Super Bowl. You can't slow down because you have the lead. Definitely, I think this team has lacked, especially the last 2 years, has lacked the foot on the throat type of mentality. They had wins sewed up and big ones that could have essentially, they finished at 7-9. If the season kind of played out a similar way and they sewed up the win at Green Bay and they sewed up the win against Pittsburgh on Monday night, that's 9-7. That might get you in the dance. And unfortunately big leads at halftime and they just collapsed. And there are all kinds of little things. And unfortunately that comes with coaching that you can second guess, but there are times where the Bengals defense has let up points and or a big touchdown right before the half. The Bengals get the football back with maybe a minute or so to play. And what do? They sit on it. And, there are other times where they kind of crawl into a shell a little bit, and you'd like to see them be a little bit more aggressive. And unfortunately, I know Marvin Lewis has kind of poo-pooed this thought, and I know, some people believe in this sort of thing, some people don't, but I think that teams and other coaches see this and they catch wind of it. And, the play 4 quarters type of thing. And, we've seen it's almost, I think I've mentioned this before, Scott, but it's almost as if when the Bengals get a big lead, they don't know what to do. And there are times, a lot of the wins that the 2015 excluded, but a lot of their wins in the playoff seasons have been, kind of come from behind, neck and neck, back and forth. I can think of like 20 Ravens games that were like that. And it's almost like, oh my gosh, we're up by like 17 points at halftime. What do we do? And they don't know how to respond. They don't know how to call plays. They don't know. I don't know what it is, but it's troubling. And if you're a good football team, and maybe it's a confidence issue, I don't know, but if you're a good football team and you're coached well and you have talent and all of that, I just kind of feel like you have a big lead, you shouldn't really relent, and you shouldn't be able. And not only should you not give up 17, 20 point leads, what have you, with just 2 quarters to play, you shouldn't crawl into a shell and play a completely different brand of football that the Bengals have seemingly done with some of these. And this last year was the biggest example of that. So I don't know if you have an additional thoughts on that, Scott, but I've seen them really, it's almost like they play a completely different style of football in final 2 quarters when they have big leads.
There's really nothing to add other than you can watch. You go back to so many seasons, and that's just the Marvin Lewis way. There's things they do well. There's things they don't do well. The optimism thing is that the things they do well are probably still going to be there. But then obviously the negative side is the things that they don't do well don't seem to be something that's going to be changed until they have a new coach. And I think, obviously many fans were frustrated because they thought those things were going to change and a new guy was coming in. And unfortunately that didn't happen, but
yeah,
I guess all you can do.
Go ahead.
Well, I was thinking today in baseball, catchers and pitchers reported. So spring training is beginning. Every baseball team starts 0-0. You still have the optimism until the season sets in and you realize, oh yeah, my team's not any good. So until that happens, you have that optimism. So I think that's one more thing is we have, 8 months of optimism. Obviously the draft's going to come up unless they just absolutely bomb it and have a Cleveland Browns type of draft. There's some reason for optimism there. So, until week 1, week 2, week 3 start out, unless they start out 0-3, we've got reason for optimism until they prove us wrong. And I'm hoping they don't, but.
Yeah. And the other unfortunate side to this coin is that not only do the Bengals not make necessary halftime adjustments seemingly when they have a big lead, they also fail to do so when they are down a bit. We've seen some comeback wins. We've seen some great games from Andy Dalton and the crew, but there have also been times, and I can think of, I believe it was weeks 14 and 15 this year against the Bears and the Vikings, where they were absolutely throttled and nothing changed after halftime from there. So I don't know what to make of it. I don't know. I think it's an amalgam of issues that, Marvin Lewis maybe doesn't do a great job of it. Maybe his assistants don't do a great job of it. And maybe, conditioning, maybe talent level. I don't know. All of that stuff might play into that. We'll see. But I wish I had better news for Brazil, but I do not at this point, unfortunately. But thanks so much for the question. Thank you all for your questions this week, and thank you all for tuning in live. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza. My co-host Scott Schulte joined me tonight, and we appreciate all of your feedback, all of your input, and the fact that you support this show. You can follow us on Twitter at BengalsOBI. You can get in touch with us via email, theobinsider@gmail.com. And you can get the program on iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, and at Cincy Jungle. I hope that you subscribe to our YouTube channel. I hope that you subscribe to the iTunes list and all of that if you enjoy this program. And we hope you do. And if you have any feedback, let us know.